Hi folks, welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. I think this might be a pretty interesting one for folks. Start off by introducing the music that you just heard playing. For those of you not familiar with that piece, it's a wonderful little string quartet piece by Hugo Wolf. Interestingly enough, it's about the only piece that's very famous of his. He wrote a lot of songs, art songs that maybe are performed a lot in Germany or Austria, but aren't well known outside of Europe. But this one wonderful little piece of string quartet music is one of the favorites of the genre, at least one of my favorites, so I hope you enjoy it. We'll also be listening to some Richard Strauss later on from, let's see, what work is that? Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, the Bourgeois Gentleman, which, I don't know, might be appropriate for the topic we've got at hand. Before I introduce the subject, let's take a look at the artwork behind. This is actually an original. This is an original artwork that is quite popular. An old work that shows the Garden of Eden scene with serpent being basically a reptilian or half reptilian female, which is commonly identified with Lilith. Which, if you know the story, was Adam's first wife, which very much figures into the topic at hand. And then over here we have an Art Nouveau rendition of that in the style of one of the Impressionists that particularly liked to draw naked figures in a Victorian age way that made nudity more artistic, I guess. At any rate, what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to title this one, Life in the Time of the Elohim. How Gilded Ages Lead to Kryptonite Cages. Okay, now, where am I going with that? For those of you who are not so familiar with biblical scholarship, you will be wanting to know what an Elohim is. Elohim is actually the first word of the Old Testament in the original language. And it does not mean God. It is a plural. And it means, literally translated, it means the powerful ones or the shining ones. And this is the source of a lot of modern scholarship that is gravitating towards the idea of ancient aliens having been involved in the creation of humanity, and part of that narrative hinges on reptilian connection, which if you follow conspiracy theories, there are many conspiracy theorists that believe that our world is dominated by reptilians or their descendants, who hold the strings of power and are trying to re-enslave humanity. And that's a very common theme among the ancient alien crowd, the Illuminati crowd. A lot of the main popular narratives of conspiracy theory are basically built around that, and that builds upon a narrative that is as old as the Bible. It's as old as the Kabbalistic interpretation of the Bible, which goes back to the Middle Ages at least, which you can follow if you do your research. I'm not going to go into that more. I want to go into what happened before, what's left. There are many people who say the Bible is the be-all, end-all. It is gospel. It's the Word of God incarnate. And I need to tell these people that they are wrong. It's not the Word of God. It contains the words of many prophets, bastardized by those who had no respect for God. and we're actually involved in the plans of the adversary, the anti-creator. Okay, so where do we need to start? Well, to understand who these Elohim are, and this idea of gilded ages leading to Kryptonite cages, which is going to explain to you why so many people think that, oh, we had this wonderful golden age. If we could just go back to that, then everything would be perfect. Somebody stole all the good things from us, and we need to get them back, because those bad reptilians took all the goodies from us, and we deserve to have the goodies like we used to. This is kind of a lot of the New Age thinking is basically that. And they want to, the most extreme of New Agers want to basically destroy civilization and set it back to a Garden of Eden type state, where females reign supreme and men were kept in check, and there was no patriarchy to get in the way of everything. And this is where that nonsense narrative comes from. It's a very political narrative, it's a very spiritual narrative, and it's a very old narrative. And I'm going to explain in detail where all that comes from by telling you who the Elohim are, where they came from, and where they went. Okay, so let's drop back to the beginning. Who created the Elohim, if that wasn't God? Who created the creators of humanity? Because that only begs the question. This is the nonsense that these ancient alien people don't seem to grok, is that, okay, if humans weren't created by God, they were created by these alien creatures, the Elohim or whatever, then who created them? And, so you've got a group of materialist conspiracy theorists that still think that, random selection, natural selection, and Darwinism did everything. And that means that all we need to do is have as much technology as the ancient aliens had, and we can do everything that they did and have all these wonderful powers back if we can just unlock the secrets of physics and so forth. And so you've got the transhumanist camp that falls on that side, and you've got the New Age back to nature camp that falls on the other side. And I'm telling you that these two extreme positions are controlled opposition. They're actually both anti-creative. They're both serving the adversary of God. And this is why both of those camps have such a difficult time talking about God. They don't like to talk about God. They say, well, I'm spiritual, not religious. How many times have you heard that from both camps? Both these nature tree hugger worshipers and these worshipers of transhumanist Neuralink technology. Let's replace everything so we can have ourselves in a nice convenient package that you can download anywhere you want it and save for future posterity. Okay. It all goes back to the story that I'm going to tell you now, and this is a true story. You don't have to take my word for it. You'll find out eventually, because there's no reason to keep the story a secret anymore. It was kept secret for a long time, and we'll understand that in the course of this discussion. Let's drop back. Where did the Elohim come from? Well, let's talk about this solar system of ours. A lot of research goes into how this solar system formed. And a lot of science has been done on it, a lot of study about how the planets formed, and it's been an interesting subject for as long as humanity has been here, right? That's where astrology comes from. That's where tracking the movement of the stars to predict eclipses, to predict special events, the precession of the equinoxes, that augurs in special events that happen basically every 12 to 24,000 years. It's actually a full cycle is 24,000 roughly, and a half cycle, which things happen on half cycles too, just like, the lunar cycle, the yearly cycle has the winter solstice and the summer solstice are the most special times, and then there's 2 other quarters which are not so special because they're kind of in between times. They're not so extreme. Okay, where did this solar system come from? And why is it here? Well, I'm going to review that really quick for you. It is here because this solar system was basically God's science experiment. In the early days of science, when the gods were playing the game of creation, kind of like a game of Pong, putting stuff together and throwing it at other things and seeing how they bounced and figuring out how the laws of physics should work. And at the point of the game that this solar system was created, they'd already figured out how to make stars, how to make planets, and how to make different kinds of stars, different kinds of planets, all kinds of minerals, elements that could be combined in different ways by chemistry to do different things. It was a pretty advanced experiment at this point. It was a very impersonal experiment. It was an experiment where, you were basically embodying whole galaxies, embodying whole universes, embodying whole stars, depending on where you wanted to put your attention. And as I've told you many times, the idea that a god could put attention everywhere, could micromanage everything, is just pure insanity, complete and absolute nonsense. The whole idea of omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence is complete and utter nonsense. And anybody who knows anything about science will tell you that. That's why so many scientists want to be atheists, because there's so much nonsense built into standard traditional views of religion. Okay, so at this stage of the game, God and the other senior creators were playing with planets and playing with building things on planets. At the time that this system was formed, God already had a pretty clear plan of what he wanted to do with this system. Had already been planning what he was going to do with it. That's why it was placed out in a nondescript arm of a nondescript galaxy, the Milky Way, instead of right at the center of all the action where all the other gods were playing their games, the big important galaxies like Andromeda or whatever. Near the center of the Big Bang, there was still a lot of action there, and people thought that was the place to be because there was so much power that came from that one spot. Okay, this is how basically God has always distracted the stupid children away from the real fun. Because the stupid children are the ones that go for power. They're not the smartest tools in the shed. They're the ones that become dinosaurs in the game when it moves on to a better playing field. Okay, and there's still a lot of dinosaurs out there playing with their perfect galaxy, their perfect universe, thinking that they can do better than God. Fine. That keeps them out of God's way. And this is how divine plans happen in the presence of free will. Okay? God is not all powerful. God doesn't control everything, but he is good at distracting the kids that get in his way. And basically all of creation is about devising distractions for the bad children so God can enjoy creating art and beauty, new ideas with the good children, without their party constantly being rained on by, pains in the asses, basically. And yes, many souls are pains in the asses, and they will always be pains in the asses. There are personalities that don't change. Every soul has their own personality. God has a personality, and not everybody likes God. That's why God doesn't force everybody to play his game. He lets them make up their own games. Okay, you don't like the game I'm playing, go somewhere else. This is the truth about God. This is the truth about the multiverse. This is why we created all this, so everybody would be able to have their own playpen to play in. Well, this solar system was God's playpen. Now, it originally had this planet that now doesn't exist. You see, there's this asteroid belt. And if you study the writings of the cuneiform writings of the Sumerians, which is the oldest tradition that's captured spiritual tradition, they actually speak of the planets as being gods, and of a cataclysmic event where one of these planets was destroyed by this dragon, Tiamat. Tiamat is one of the many names of the adversary's chief agent, Lilith. The adversary being BORG, being the hive mind that basically wants to assimilate all souls into their virtual reality so they can milk their energy and use it for their own creative purposes. This is basically the truth that's in the Matrix movie. And there are many other gods who think that's a pretty good idea, and they run their heavens like a matrix. They attract souls in with fancy invitation signs, the bright lights, all of the happy spirit guides, and they lead you in and they capture you and they use your energy. And that's just fine, because a soul that's going to be captured that easily is going to not be able to see through holographic lies, through deep fakes. They're too gullible to be a good creator. To be a good creator, you've got to be able to question everything and not trust anything until you've seen it work, not once, but from many perspectives. Okay? This is where a lot of scientists fall flat. They think, okay, I'm going to put this experiment together to prove what I want to prove. And I'm going to arrange it the way that I think is best to prove it. And if I observe what I want to see once, I'm going to publish. And then I'll be famous and rich, and I'll sell it to a company, and they'll go into production, and I'll make $1 billion, or get a patent and a pat on the back from somebody who's making $1 billion. That's not real science. Real science is repeatable. You do an experiment again and again in different conditions, try to concoct every different way that you can prove it, till you prove that this actually is valid. This is how the laws of chemistry and physics evolved. They didn't just emerge fully cooked in somebody's lap. The speed of light drifted until it didn't drift. Or maybe it's still drifting in some parts of some universes that we just haven't observed yet. And this is an argument that physicists have been having a lot lately. Is reality local? How local is it? How did we get all these things that we measure as constants when, if we look at the light that's coming from other stars, which, if you know anything about how light works, the light coming from distant stars is coming from a star that must have emitted the light a long, long time ago, because light only travels at the speed of light. And if an object is 1 million light years away, that means the light you're seeing from it came 1 million years ago. And many of the galaxies and so forth are extremely distant. In fact, some are so distant that because the universe is expanding, we're never going to see the light from them. They're moving away from us faster than the light is traveling, which is kind of a weird thing, but this is bothering physicists because they're realizing, you know what? At the rate that the universe is expanding, we're eventually not going to be able to see anything. And that's troubling to physicists that don't understand the nature of creation. Makes them feel very lonely. Okay, back to the Elohim. So, this system was cooked up for a very special reason. It was cooked up at a time when basically all the old gods, I call them, the senior creators that started this whole experiment of creation, the ones that existed in the heaven of pure thought, were having fun playing this game, and in various different forms. Now, they would inhabit the form kind of like a demon possesses a soul, possesses a human being. They would just decide, okay, I'm going to go be that. And they would embody that thing and be endowed with all the power of that thing, all the perception of that thing. So if you wanted to keep close tabs on your star, you had to embody the star. And at some point in the creation of this solar system, God was the body of this star, who attracted just the right set of elements to it. In fact, was embodied the previous star that most of this star came from. Maybe multiple stars were drawn together from various supernova to get just the right composition for just the right star to form, just the right planets to form. So phase one of this happened in an era where basically the most advanced soul vehicles were what we might call elementals. These were not just pure fire or pure water or pure, there's like we think of, you know, classical elementals, but they were actually became very sophisticated, like androids, robots. Robots were actually the first things that explored the cosmos before life ever was created. They originated right on this same system as the first effort at a mobile, you know, star-faring soul vehicle that could, rather than just picking up and disembodying from one thing, could actually move from one place to another. Now, before this, if you wanted to go attack somebody else's star or something, or mess up their galaxy, well, you had to take your galaxy and ram it, basically, or send an offshoot, a planet, or an asteroid or something, and throw it at your enemy to throw their plan out of kilter. And that's exactly what happened to this planet that was in the asteroid belt. But before that happened, this planet is where life developed, was created, where DNA was invented and perfected in many cycles of development that led up to the creation of the first Elohim. They came from this planet. Now, when the other gods realized what God was doing, they realized, you know what, he's doing something here that's kind of dangerous. I mean, you know, we thought he was just tinkering in his own little sandbox here and hadn't thrown any planets at us for a long time, hadn't been doing anything but focusing in on his little lonely test tube here. But then they realized, uh-oh, there's a threat here. They realized that threat when they started being invaded by these androids, these elementals. And that was the beginning of the transfer of the war in heaven that was kind of like a billiard ball event in early creation to it being more of a what we consider a real war. Invading armies, etc., starfleets, all of this fun stuff happened in that era and got more sophisticated as these soul vehicles that God was developing got more sophisticated. And there were many, many battles back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What made these Elohim so special is that they were the first organic chosen species. The chosen species before that had been inorganic, had been elemental. Now, what is a chosen species? A chosen species is one that is destined, is designed to eventually become like the gods. Now, they have to earn that. Just because you're a chosen species doesn't mean that all of a sudden, ooh, I get to go out to be a god. That's bullshit. And, there's a lot of idiots around this world right now that thinks that's where humanity is at. That's not. All of this ascension bullshit. Oh, I'm getting my new DNA. I'm raising my vibration. I'm going to be a god. You're nuts. I'm sorry. You got a little bit of the story, but you carried it too far. Now, all you're going to get from this event is one rung up the spiritual evolution ladder. That's all everybody gets that's participating in the human race, the human species, as a chosen species. And that one rung up means that humans will, instead of all getting to grow up to basically a 4D awareness of space and time, and kind of a materialistic understanding of reality, all humans will come to the fifth dimensional spiritualities, fifth dimensional consciousness. That's not the top. That's not arriving. That's not, ooh, I'm there, I'm done. Sorry, it's a 12D process. The Merkaba is a 12D construct. Consciousness is a 12-dimensional construct. And you're only going to be participating at the lowest rung of spiritual awareness at the end of this event. And only in your next incarnation, because you don't really get to integrate what you've learned until you go through the afterlife process. So many of you that think you've already arrived, I'm sorry, you're going to have a rude awakening when you die and you get to the heaven that attracts you and find out that, a lot of the things I believe weren't exactly right. You don't need to take my word for it, just wait and find out. At any rate, this planet here that got destroyed by Tiamat, by the anti-creator Lilith, as represented by this planetary object that was set on a path to destroy by... Actually, what's funny is it was all a planned event. This is like controlled opposition stuff. Because God knew that his chosen system would come under attack. That the other old gods would see it as a threat. And this is why God created the adversary. As basically the generator of bad ideas to give to bad souls to get them to do all the dirty work that the dark karma dirty work that had to happen to get the whole family to grow up. Okay, so this planet here is where the Elohim came from. Now, once they developed, these Elohim were the first humanoid chosen species. The reptilians were not. The reptilians were actually a creation of the Elohim. The Elohim were basically the first non-old God chosen species, organic species, who reproduced organically. They had the ability to learn and grow spiritually to gain God-level powers. That's what being a chosen species is. But just like humanity, those powers had levels. At that time, the highest level they were allowed to attain was this level 5. There was not an awareness of even a higher level of spiritual attainment. This was kind of God's secret in his pocket that, you know what? That's why I'm God, and you other gods aren't God, because you've only reached the first level of godhood, and I've reached the highest level before I even created you. That's how smart God was. He didn't make anything that wasn't planned out ahead of time and that he couldn't manage. Not control, manage. Because a good manager, a good leader knows if you lead like an authoritarian dictator, a tyrant, your creations will naturally oppose you, and they will eventually depose you. This is why everything in creation had to happen the way it was. Because God didn't want to make any opposition he couldn't run circles around. He did make opposition, but it was controlled opposition. He knew what they were going to be like because that's the way he created them. That's the way he programmed them. And then set them on their own path to learn on their own with the programming he gave them, which is basically what every parent does. Think about it. If you're a parent, up to about the age of 5 or 6, you're the sole programmer. If you've done a good job of parenting, you've been allowed to do a good job of parenting and haven't had both parents having to work full time and let your child be raised by technology or some nimbo kid at a daycare. Okay, this is the role of the parent to program the child until they're ready to start programming themselves. That's exactly how God worked with the first children, which were the old gods. They had personalities. They weren't perfect. They were far from it. Okay, so the Elohim were the first organic creations that could come to grow to become gods on their own. Their souls could advance past the physical level of, basically being a programmable slave. Essentially, if your only consciousness is in the first 4 dimensions, you're completely a slave to eating, sleeping, breathing, reproducing. This is a beast level of consciousness. And this is the level of consciousness that most of you will be retreating to at the end of this event, which we'll be talking more about in the due course of time. Okay, so the Elohim started here. Their home world was destroyed. Now, by that time, they had been all over the galaxy and exploring and having fun, and they were the best thing since buttered toast. They had all these high spiritual powers. Their leaders especially had very advanced spiritual powers. They could basically slice rocks like butter goes through a knife. They could mind control weaker souls, get them to do what they wanted to do, make them serve them, make them happy to serve them. The Elohim were BORG, and still are. They operate that way. This was the tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed race of the Pleiades. The Pleieadians, who you've been hearing about as these wonderful, loving, perfect beings from Orion's belt, that's BORG, friends. That's controlled opposition, essentially, but still opposition. Pretty much all the old chosen species don't really want a new chosen species in the neighborhood. It upsets the balance of power in the Galactic Federation. So they want to basically control new species and be their big brother and be the senior partner in the relationship. And there's a range of that, all the way to we just want to destroy them because we think they're too likely to go rogue on us. And so there's a range of how the higher BORG hive minds, and it is not just one, each planet has their own, each BORG planet has their own leader, their own hive mind leader. They work with each other generally because they consider themselves part of the same species, just like humans band together against species like the Neanderthals and may wipe them out, or others that they consider subspecies, like some have attempted to do with the darker populations of this planet. At any rate, that's who the Elohim are. Now, at the time this planet was destroyed, it wasn't such a big deal because they still knew what the plan was. And they actively said, okay, well, we knew this was going to happen. It's our job to participate in and accelerate the next phase of the plan, which was to develop the next chosen species. And the next chosen species, those who really knew what was in God's mind, knew had to be less powerful, less capable, had to gradually lose their superpowers. And this is where, the story of Superman and Kryptonite comes from. This other planet that hit this system was like the first version of karma that hit the Elohim, and it hit them very hard. They could no longer live forever in this system. Those that stayed suddenly found that they had new limitations. Some of the big limitations this early on were, we don't get to live forever. We have diseases. We have things that can kill us. We have to be more careful than we used to. That's the kind of limitation that hit when this Tiamat hit the system. So they didn't come back for a long time. In the meantime, others of the older chosen species who knew a little bit more about the plan terraformed the Earth. It came together out of the debris of this planet to form the Earth and the Moon. And knowing all the planets that had been settled created the conditions for anybody growing up on this planet to see through the patterns of rotation and precession. There were certain star systems that were of interest. And those star systems were the systems settled by other chosen species. They started viewing those and worshiping them. And that gradually brought those species back to the chosen planet, the new chosen planet. The old chosen planet was this one. It was destroyed. Now, various of the other planets had been chosen for different chosen species. The gas giants made a good place for air elementals. Stars make a good place for fire elementals. Very heavy, dense planets for earth elementals. Okay, each of these planets in turn had a specific function. They wouldn't be here if they didn't. And they may have a function in the future. Saturn is a very special one. The rings of Saturn are rings, really rings. They're promise rings of souls that are going to be released when this experiment is done. They've been captured inside this experiment because they rose to God level during the final phase of this experiment. They haven't been released. This test tube has been restricted for a very, very long time. We'll talk about how we got to that restriction. So eventually the Elohim decided it was time to return to this home world and take over again. Come and recover their patrimony, if you will. And they came back and they found, oh, okay, this planet has a lot of life on it. Doesn't have any hominids on it yet. Doesn't have any creatures like us yet. Well, that's not good. Let's start intermixing with them. And that's when the dinosaurs, the reptilians, were created. In fact, they were descended from the Elohim, mixing their DNA with the life that was emerging, and saying, you know what, probably the most quick way to repopulate this planet with beings that are as intelligent as us and can serve us and help us, which gods usually do that. They're kind of lazy. They want somebody to do the hard work for them, especially if they have limitations. They created the reptilians and made them serve them. And that got to the point where some bright Elohim decided, you know what, I feel sorry for these reptilians doing all the dirty work, the heavy lifting, and being put upon by us gods. I think we should give them the gift of knowledge, the ability to rise above a beast level of existence. So that's what they did, and that was the reptilian Jesus, the reptilian Christ. And pretty much every chosen species has had their incarnation of God that kind of threw a wrench in what everybody else thought was the plan. And of course, when the other older chosen species got wind of this new reptilian species developing and starting to explore the stars and starting to be troublesome, they decided they needed to be destroyed. And that's when the great extinction of the reptile age happened. And the Elohim came back again, this time saying, oh, we're not going to work with those. We're going to work with these mammal things. And we're going to mix with them. And we're not just going to choose, like one best species. We're going to choose all of them. And this is when the Elohim created the therianthrope gods. The gods that are depicted in Egyptian mythology, in the cave paintings, in the mythology of the Sumerians, in the Naga worship, the dragon worship of East Asia. These were half Elohim, half mammal or other animal hybrids. And this was one of the golden ages of this new planet where, okay, we realized that, it was kind of a bad idea to try to make everybody in our image. We're going to make a lot of images. We're going to let pretty much every species identify themselves and become gods in their own way. In a way, it was much similar to what's going on right now, where you have people wanting to identify as furries, and they think that their godhood, their identity, their power is wrapped up in being a furry. This is a repeating pattern. This age of the Elohim resulted in these half-breed gods who organized themselves in a way that was useful at the time. What they did was they organized in a way that said, okay, we have our slaves, we have the lower level species, the lower levels of the species on this planet that we use and control, and we each have our own set of slaves. We have our own hive mind. This is our little city, and we use the resources of the surrounding area, and we trade with others if we don't have resources we need. And this was the early era of civilization as we know it. That's why you see these big statues of half man, half bull. That's why you see centaurs. That's why you see half reptile creatures, half bird, half fish. This was a time of maximal use of resources and separation of these different groups based upon, kind of a ruling class of their kind of god, lording it over the local populace, which was these humanoids, which the Elohim didn't allow them to develop because they were afraid, well, they look too much like us, they might become a threat to us. As long as we know that these other new gods who don't have the power of shape-shifting anymore, we didn't give them that, so they look like they're going to look, we can always see that they're not us because they don't have blue eyes, they're not tall and beautiful humanoid creatures. And that's how they kept the Earth under control and kept the experiment going. Not wanting to be challenged, not realizing that, like most powerful people do, get into the mode of not realizing they are the problem, not the solution. And this is essentially the story of all creation. God realized that the problem with his family was him. If he was going to solve his problem of a family that didn't get along, he was going to have to solve it personally. And that's what God has been doing, as we'll get to. Okay, so this time of these half this, half that species lasted for a while, until, again, God incarnated and threw a wrench in the works and created a new Eden, a new version of the hominid species that had the powers that, at least some of the powers of the Elohim. Now, it was done in secret because you don't want the Elohim to know they're being threatened until it's too late. So, that's the way Gardens of Eden have always been. They're like secret labs. The first Garden of Eden of humanity, of the human species as we know it now, not the original Elohim, which you might think of as humanity version 0, if you will. They were the most powerful, but the least emotionally developed, the least in control of themselves generation of humans ever. They had all these powers just like the old gods, and they thought they could do anything, be anything, lord it over any other species they encountered, and use them and abuse them through mind control. Still do. Although, we'll get to the Kryptonite part soon. Okay, so this mischievous god incarnated and mixed with the hominids of that era, creating a new species. Now, that originally it was with the idea that, oh well, this here's something I need to fill in here. At this point, this game had been going on so long that the Elohim had forgotten all about how they were created. They were kind of like the materialist scientists of today. Wow, we don't believe in God. There's all these old stories that we have and stuff, but we've explored the whole galaxy. We know how everything works. We know all the laws of science and how to use our spiritual psychic powers, and we don't need God, right? They'd gotten pretty much to the same conclusion, that we are the gods. If we had a creator, it must be dead because we haven't seen him in a long time. Well, they had been seeing him, but he was in disguise, if you will. He was incarnating in their midst. They did not understand how incarnation worked. There was a theory, a memory that might have been a thing, but at this point they'd already gotten the version of reincarnation that had amnesia. And so they thought one life is all you get. Now those lives last almost forever, so who cares? We just have to be careful that we don't let another god kill us. And or accidentally. It would be really stupid to let one of our slaves kill us, wouldn't it? That's kind of where the Elohim were at that stage. That's where these therianthropic children of the Elohim were. They weren't necessarily bad. They weren't that good either. They lorded it over their little empires on Earth and throughout the stars, and gave their names to planets and so forth, and gave the mythology of that to the creatures here on this planet, which has been the source of all the chosen species, all throughout history, all the way back to the formation of this star system, the formation of the Milky Way, the formation of the galaxy cluster that the Milky Way is a part of. It's all like a bunch of stacking dolls of nested experiments. I'm in the middle. I can't. Sorry, I sent my wife away. I locked the door so I wouldn't be disturbed. Okay, so basically, the Elohim mixed with the latest hominids. It was definitely taboo at this point because these half-breed species had started causing trouble. They thought, well, they can't cause trouble since they don't look like us. Well, they invented the technology to do holograms, to do deep fakes. And so what the Elohim thought was going to protect them actually didn't protect them. And that's essentially how each stage of this experiment has gone, that the older chosen species have to realize that, oh, we thought we were going to retain all the power, but we gradually have to share it with these other species. And in fact, at this point, the 12 primary species of the Galactic Federation are these 12 species that got together and said, okay, this is the zodiac on this planet that keeps producing these weird species. We're going to make a set of rules between the 12 of us, and we'll make sure nothing like that ever happens again. And if it ever does, we're going to destroy this planet because they keep causing trouble for us every time a new chosen species comes up. That's what the Galactic Federation really is about. At least except for some of the ones that have the secret societies of the Galactic Federation who know a little bit more about the truth of the divine plan. And so, as above, so below applies there. There are aliens, higher dimensional beings that think they know the score and trying to affect what's going on the planet, and they're just as clueless as human leaders. Same kind of errors, and that's essentially how the plan was designed. Okay, so let's talk about, I think that sort of gives you an idea of the different Gilded Ages. The Gilded Ages are where basically, the existing chosen species think they have it all figured out and have gamed the system so that they will never be challenged in power. And that lasts for as long as happens till a new chosen species arises and survives all the attempts to destroy them. And there have been many attempts to destroy humanity. There were attempts to destroy the Elohim by the elemental species, the android species, the inorganic chosen species before them. And those species still have their own place in the galaxy. There are races of inorganic hive minds who have their own seat at the table and their own way of working in this system. They like to work through cancer, viruses. That's their preferred method. They don't really understand organic chemistry that well. They understand it well enough to play with RNA or play with cosmic rays that can disrupt DNA and cause cataclysmic mutations. And that's kind of a hit and miss thing because you're using old technology. It's kind of hard to throw the exact right cosmic ray at the exact right place with the right energy to destroy a whole species. But they're still trying to do that. And it's all part of the plan. It's all controlled opposition. So we're getting hit by a lot of things as a species right now. And there's a lot of folks that think we're going to have another great reset. Well, that might have happened, except it didn't. Why didn't it happen? Well, because the plan was fulfilled. The whole plan, the whole reason this system was developed was to build a government for souls. Think about it. If the first heaven was perfect, if God was perfect from the beginning, as some of you numbskulls like to think, everything was wonderful in heaven, why was any creation needed? It wasn't wonderful. In fact, the worst thing that you can have is, I love that line from Cool Hand Luke. What we have here is a failure to communicate. What we've had all along was a failure to communicate. And if you don't communicate well, you do some awful nasty things to each other, thinking you're playing with each other. Think about it. Think about a cat playing with a mouse or their prey. That's a failure to communicate. Now, in physical incarnation, we have to eat, we have to survive, we have to consume things. But if we aren't in communion with what we're consuming, we're no better than that cat. We're like an animal. And that's what gods of power were until they were taught compassion, until they were taught karma, until karma taught herself what it was. She had to learn it all first. That was her goal. That was her assignment. And you ask, well, why didn't God do all that? God knew he wasn't perfect. That's why God was so special. Any first soul that thought they were perfect would never have created a damn thing. I'm already perfect. Why do I need anything else? Okay? Any other god that ever existed that thought they were perfect could only create copies of something that was very imperfect, that was delusional, that thought they were all-powerful and all-knowing and so perfect that all I need to do is make everything else like me, and it will all be perfect too. Well, that's exactly what BORG is. That's what the adversary is. That's what the dummies of creation are all about. Until they learn better. That's what Lucifer was when he started out being the volunteer, the ass-licking son of God, first son of God, who thought, oh, I'm going to volunteer to be the first good galaxy, the first good universe of the Big Bang, and then that bad guy BORG, he will pick one of his disciples to be the first bad universe, and I will show you, God, how good I am and how wonderful I am by making creation perfect like me. Okay, well, Lucifer wasn't perfect either. He thought he was. He thought, oh, it's going to be easy to beat this BORG guy and his acolyte Lilith. Well, it wasn't so easy, was it? Turned out to produce a lot of very interesting things. And made a very fun game. God enjoyed it more than any other soul. He didn't create all that much personally, but as I've told you, he kind of gave little ideas and nudges. There were bigger ones at first. God was the first proton, which is, if you know anything about protons, the nucleus of a hydrogen atom, the prerequisite for making stars. After that, Lucifer became neon, the second element. Well, I'm going to do better than you. When you run out of fuel for your stars, I'm going to take over where you left off and make the next thing so the star can keep on making more stuff. And then Lilith chimed in, well, I'm going to be lithium, the third element. And that's how that era of creation worked. It's all been controlled opposition, but free-willed opposition, which is the difference between the controlled opposition of a loving God and the controlled opposition of an authoritarian dictator. Okay, that's the difference between an enlightened government and a despotic government. And it's a lesson we need to learn again. It's a lesson in humility. The founding fathers of the U.S. were not gods. They were very flawed individuals. A few of them probably were on Messiah missions. I think Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, some of the other folks that guided us to just the right things. Even Benedict Arnold, I think, was a Messiah. You think of him as a great traitor, but if you study his life, it was actually Benedict Arnold that won all the great battles that won the Revolutionary War, not George Washington. George Washington got all the credit because George Washington was a rich asshole who wanted to be famous, wanted everybody to look up to him, wanted to be the father of his country. Well, he had his good points too, but he was not a good general. He was a shitty general. And he was also the largest landowner, the largest slave owner in the colonies. This is true. He wasn't the greatest guy. And I don't know, maybe he had a change. Maybe he realized that after he became the first president, they offered him to be the king of America. And he turned it down and said, no, I think we don't need kings anymore. So that's what he did that was good. And that's to the extent that George Washington was a Messiah, it was in rejecting autocracy. However, he could have used his influence to set up a parliamentarian style government that I think actually was healthier. The government of the UK was much more successful in creating a functional empire than the government of the United States. because there was more of a sense of responsibility at the top, more of a sense of continuity with the monarchy than happens in the United States presidency. Think about it from this viewpoint of any other country. When you know that the United States' policy can change on a dime in 4 or 8 years, or more in the case of FDR, the one president that served more than 2 terms, and nearly took us down some very dark paths towards communism, knows that America is not the easiest country to deal with. We're less popular, I think, on the average than the British Empire was before us, and for good reason. Our policy changes. We're more difficult to deal with. We're more mercurial in our nature. And that scares other countries. And that makes other countries want to oppose us, maybe more so than they opposed the British Empire at the time. We need better government. We need more godly government. Now, that's what the founders of the United States tried to do. They were trying to make a godly government. But they didn't understand who God was. They were still stuck in this nonsense idea that God was all-powerful, all-knowing, omniscient, and had chosen Christians as the people that were to work His will among humanity. And that's a dark place. The same dark place that Muslims are with their God Allah and their prophet Muhammad. The same dark place that Buddhists are with their worship of Nirvana, whatever the fuck that is. And if you look at the mythology of all the different religions, you'll see that it's all grasping at trying to understand the hierarchy, the structure of the game of souls, the government of souls. Many different answers, and I can tell you that none of the right answers are a collective of one. The most dangerous group on the planet right now are these folks that say, we're all one. And if you're not with us, well, you're low vibration and you don't matter. Oh, you're just not enlightened. You're going to be left behind in the old earth. These are dangerous people, dear folks. Why did I call you dear? I don't know. I have a hard time telling different people apart. They all seem like part of my family these days. What I'm getting at is that the Elohim are still there. They still have an agenda. They're not all bad. They're not all good. They're very much similar to your human leaders. They don't know what this game is all about. Most of them don't know that the game is already done. It's done because the Messiah has been born, and we have completed the mission of the last chosen species of this long experiment. Humanity is the last chosen species. Not because they're so smart, not because they're developing all this great technology and they're gonna conquer the stars with transhumanism. No, actually, because humanity is the most flawed species ever. They had to learn everything from being as dumb as a post. They had to create language. They had to create writing. They had to create many languages and piece them together through conquest and evolution into the chosen language. The chosen language is English. That's the language that's going to be spoken in the far, far, far future. It will be extended. It's going to be an evolving language. That's what makes English so great. That's why the last empires of this chosen species were the British Empire and the American Empire. There is not going to be a Chinese empire. There is not going to be a Russian empire. There is never going to be a German empire or a French empire or an Indian empire or a one world government that's going to last for more than the time it takes for such nonsense to fall apart. And it will fall apart. It's inherently brittle. The globalism that we are doing now is a nonsense. It is based upon the most brittle of ideas, the idea of the concentration of power in the handful of people that think that they're the smartest ones. That is an anti-creative model. That's the model of BORG. That's not the model of God. So, I guess what I want to conclude this, let's talk a little bit about Kryptonite. Where does that idea come from? Why don't other chosen species want to come back to this system? Why does it get left by its lonesome for so long before we have another great reset? Well, that's part of the game. It's designed that way. Basically, the precession of the equinoxes, these constellations we go around, allow each one of these previous chosen species to kind of be the steward of the experiment. While they are the steward of the experiment, they are the only species that gets to be very actively involved in what's going on here. And that gives them kind of the leadership of the Galactic Federation, if you will. And during that time, their real leaders, the secret societies that know what's really going on, their gods, who have maybe been hiding amongst them, come out of the woodwork and they start working more actively and toward what they think is progress for the chosen species, humanity. Now, sometimes that progress means, yeah, we do need another great reset. Things are not going well here. This species still knows too much, has too much of the old knowledge, and I'll repeat it now. I talk about this a lot. We're doing, when an experiment in government is a spirit experiment in social engineering. If you know anything about social engineering, you know that you cannot have a successful experiment where all the subjects know what they're being experimented for. This is why it's been so difficult for humans to come up with good governments. If you're the one who sets it up, you kind of have an advantage, an inside track, and you can use and abuse that power. This is why communism never, ever, 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 ever will work. I'm sorry if you are a Marxist, communist, globalist, fascist. You are stupid. You are pursuing, you are like Lilith, like the dumbest soul that could be ever controlled by another soul through their mind. You're a useful idiot. It does not work. You cannot devise any government that is top down, that has massive control from the top, that works. Absolute nonsense. You have to find an organization which is like nature, like systems that have evolved through natural processes. This is why you have the laws of physics and chemistry. This is why natural selection does work. Evolution does work. It's just very, very slow. You can direct it, but you've got to stop long enough to see if what you did is a good idea or bad. And most of the work that we're doing right now in genetic engineering is inherently extremely dangerous, because you're trying to get genes out to the market before your competition, and you do not test them thoroughly. And the most poorly tested product the biochemical industry has ever come out with was, well, maybe the vaccines. Run a close second. You're creating things that could destroy us. could destroy this species. And that's stupid. That's anti-creative, isn't it? If you want to destroy the chosen species, you must be on the side of the adversary. Maybe you don't realize it, but you are useful idiots serving the bad guys. Now, you're welcome to do that. That's what free will's about. And because souls are immortal, because DNA can be reconstructed easily by the Elohim, who are masters of manipulating DNA, it doesn't matter if humanity destroys itself on this planet. There are many of these other species who have taken humans off the planet already for various purposes of their own. Some to use as zoo animals, showing, oh, this is the chosen species that we destroyed again. They almost made it that time, but we captured a few for our zoo. There are some who, are kind of like Noah's Ark. That, we got to preserve them. They're going to destroy themselves, and we got to make sure that we've got enough to seed the planet again so we don't have to go evolve a new chosen species. And there are some that, want slaves for their worlds, because hominids make pretty good slaves. And this species is pretty easy to control, especially the ones that let themselves be ruled by the heart. Which is, I should mention again, is something you need to be wary of. The human soul vehicle has multiple brains, as I tell you in many of my episodes. The heart brain is the least developed. There is a small brain in the middle of the heart. And it is an interface, a coprocessor to your soul. It is not the seat of the soul. It is a coprocessor. And it's the one that is easiest to tamper with, easiest to propagandize, easiest to possess as a demon. And this is why propaganda plays on heartstrings. Now, it plays on our head strings too, and there are some that are being used and abused by basically giving all their allegiance, all their consciousness to either the right or left hemisphere. The right hemisphere, being connected to the left hand, is the artistic, imaginary one, who likes to think in fantasy terms. This is a very popular side of the brain to, when this is combined with the heart brain and working against the logical left brain, are the ones that are absolutely convinced that communism is going to work if we just do it right. And they'll argue up one side and down the other that it will, because they are completely oblivious to any rational argument or any analysis of history. In fact, they want to destroy history. If it doesn't fit the fantasy that my heart and my fantasy brain have cooked up, I'm going to eliminate it. This is cancel culture. It's just as dangerous to be completely ruled by the logical, rational left brain, because that brain is easy to capture into programming. And we all start out with programming. These are the souls that grow up into human beings that just do what they're told. The world's always been this way. It's always going to be that way. I'm just going to do what I'm told and work within the system to get the best for me. They don't tend to develop much spirituality. They don't tend to develop any spirituality. They just, they may be raised as Catholics or Muslims or whatever, but they just stay within the dots, stay within the lines. Color by number souls. Now, they're necessary. I'm not dissing these people. They are necessary to a functional society. But they're not the ones we should be have as leaders any more than the ones that are wrapped up in these heart fantasies or right brain fantasies. You need souls that have all the brains being used with the soul and led by the soul, not letting those brains lead them. And anybody who believes that physical things create reality, that there is no such thing as a soul, we're just a bunch of electrons and protons and whatnot going around and interacting electromagnetically to produce chemical interactions, and everything can be explained, blah, 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 blah. The atheist materialist is a dunce, is stupid. They don't know how human beings function. They don't know how to understand our history, and they should not be in charge of our civilization. They are going to destroy it. You need leaders who understand leadership, who understand God, who understand how to be a good parent. A good parent is a tough, loving parent. A good parent is not an unconditional love parent. Oh, you can do anything because you're my child. I'll forgive you. That's nonsense. That's a bad parent. There is no God worth their salt that raises children like that. They create entitled bastards that take advantage of other people and keep doing worse and worse things until God learned that the hard way. Okay? He wanted it to be easy. And that's why he created the Elohim. That's why he allowed the creation or facilitated the creation of every chosen species. He wanted to make it easy for you. Every time he tried to, it proved that he wasn't the greatest parent, that he was too loving. And this final chosen species, he had to really be a bastard. He had to let you suffer a lot. He had to suffer a lot because he was born to prove it. And this is where I'm going to finish up this story. This final chosen species, this final version of humanity exists and is different from the original Elohim in that God is incarnating himself in this species with the same set of rules that you are. Reincarnation amnesia. There are Elohim out there elsewhere that are like the old gods. They don't forget. They keep remembering. They have the memory of everything they've ever done since the beginning of time. And that's why they're kept out of this system. They would muck up this experiment big time. They don't come here because the moment they enter the exclusion sphere of this solar system, they start taking on the latest version of karma. Their DNA starts adapting to the pressures of living inside this system. And it's like kryptonite to them. They don't live as long. They start losing their spiritual powers. They become more vulnerable to dying and having to be reborn again. And if they're reborn again, they don't get to choose to be reborn as an Elohim because karma won't let them. So they're scared shitless of the system, and they send their servants here. They send their stupidest, the cannon fodder, the expendables here to do their bidding here. That's who you're dealing with when you're dealing with demons, when you're dealing with spirit guides who are controlling you and trying to get you to support their cosmic oneness agenda. They're not the smartest souls in the shed. They're the ones that are being thrown into the war as cannon fodder. They're like the poor hapless Russian and Ukrainian soldiers being sent into battle right now with substandard weapons because they just need to keep the war enough so that the world can suffer economically and they can kill the US dollar, which is what this is all about. They want to kill the US system because they are doing the bidding of the adversary that thinks, oh, we just need to kill this English language, kill all the English-speaking countries, destroy English language culture by bastardizing it with all the pop nonsense that they're spreading out of Hollywood now. That is the adversary's agenda. That's what they've been trying to do, because they didn't realize that the Messiah was already born. Too late. Game over. All that's left to happen is for the Messiah to die. And everything that was set up to happen next is going to come into fruition. And there's a lot of prophecy around what that's going to be. Some of it's true, some of it isn't. Some of it's only true in some universes, etc., etc. If you think that you're going to get this new earth where everybody is lovey, 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 and we're all one, we're all at Christ consciousness, well, I'm sorry, that's not this earth. We still have work to do. We're not done with creation yet. We weren't done after day 6. We're not done after day 7. We're finishing up day 7, which was the test, the final test of karma within this system. Now it's going out of the lab. Now we have to take karma to the galaxy. This is the truth of the Star Trek story. We're going to go take back this universe from the adversary. We'll kill them if we have to, because their souls, they're going to be reborn. They'll be reborn somewhere else. And if they're really bad, they're not going to be reborn here. They're going to be reborn in BORG's universe, or the universe of some dark god who doesn't work like God works, who's not a good parent. We're going to need the most creative souls. We're going to need smart and creative and responsible souls for this next phase of creation. That's what this species was chosen for. We're going to need a species that is willing to wake up to the truth of this experiment, that is going to accept who God really is. It's not going to happen overnight. And there will be many, many souls clinging to old ideas of God. As long as they do that in a tolerant and respectful manner, and don't try to use their religion, their ideology, whatever, as a tool to beat others into submission and to assume political power over others, assume domination over others, they will be participating in this next phase of creation. Day 8 is going to be a really fun time to be alive. It's going to be a lot like Star Trek, a spiritual Star Trek. But the vast majority of you aren't ready for that right now. You're not really ready to even be human. Be honest. You cannot deal with temptation. You have not been able to resist the temptation of all these propaganda narratives you're constantly bombarded with through your smartphones. And that makes you a liability to God. He loves you, but he just doesn't need you in the prime universe for day 8 of creation. There are plenty of other places you can go. Backwater worlds that are still run by BORG, backwater worlds that haven't woken up yet, that are still kind of living at the Stone Age or the Tech Age. That's where you're going to go in your next incarnation. And it's not punishment. It's actually a reward, because you're not ready to... Okay, my wife wants to come in and do something. Okay, you want to pose for my audience? Let me switch back to this view so you can see her better. There's my beautiful wife. She just got her hair all fixed up nice, so she's proud of that. I'll leave it to you to decide whether she's more of a Lilith or an Eve. I think she's got a bit of both. And respects karma quite a bit, though she tries to deny it. At any rate, I think we're ready to wrap up this session. Not that we're going to start a new session here. Well, we might. I don't know. We never know. Our baby's downstairs, so maybe not. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed that discussion. Till next time, like, share, subscribe, and tune in again to the Omnist Hour. Till then, happy karma.